All right. Well, my next guest is C.R. Campbell, and he is a husband and a father and a gentleman and a CEO and executive, the finest dressed grandfather now you can add to your list that you will ever see, but just has become a really dear friend. And he had me in tears at first watch. I think we were both kind of crying. I'll throw you into that.
I'll admit we were doing a little.
But I'll tell you what, this is a man who has a lot to teach me, a lot to teach us. I think there's a lot to learn about the reality of hurt and also the reality of healing. And CR just has a way of helping me get my mind around those things and the fact that both of those things are true in our story. And so tonight, that's really what we're going to do, is just lean into that story. And so CR, would you guys do me a favor and welcome CR Campbell?
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. It's an honor to be here. I just have to say I'm kind of amazed that we have this big an audience. When you posted the Lab, the podcast, and the first line, subject line, the first word was hurt, yeah. I thought, wow, that's really an exciting Thursday evening.
Yeah. You know what? That's the thing. I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because I think it is, good job showing up for that conversation. These are the conversations we need to have. In our culture, comfort is prized, and escape is prized, and busyness is prized, and productivity is. And all of that is good. Some of that is better than others. But what it does is sometimes it underplays some of these conversations we need to have. So sure. Thank you for being willing to lean in.
Happy to be here.
All right. Anytime that we're writing a story, anytime that we're living our story, we have an idea, an imagination of the way that we think it's going to go. That's just, we always have our dreams, and I'm a dreamer, and we have a way that we think our story is going to go. And very rarely, I would almost say it never goes exactly the way we think it's going to go. And that is what makes the journey interesting and invites us to a kind of nimbleness and a kind of faith that we've got to learn. That's an acquired skill. So if you're willing, let's go back, because your story has had some turns, some big turns. So let's start in 1981, and if you would, you got married to Kelly in 1981.
I did.
Let's start right there and introduce us to Kelly in the first turn, maybe that early turn, because you guys encountered it very quickly, that this story that you maybe had imagined didn't go exactly the way that you thought it was going to go.
Yeah, and Zach, as you said, we got married in 81. I was 21, she was 21. I was pretty sure I had it all figured out, as most 21-year-olds do. She was pretty confident as well. We met. We dated for 3 weeks. I asked her to marry me, and 3 months later, we were married. Absolutely by the grace of God that we ended up lasting 30 years. In fact, to this day, it's still hard for me to believe. But we did. We got married. We were truthfully happy. We had friends and family surrounding us. We had a traditional wedding. We had, 300 people at our wedding. It was a big event. I hardly remember it, as most people hardly, I think, remember their weddings, but it was wonderful. So we had the beginning of what most people consider an idyllic life, right? We had the traditional country club marriage, beautiful wife, we're young. I figured I would be a multimillionaire by the time I was 23, and we were all set. In 82, Kelly got pregnant. It was wonderful. It was good. We were excited. And in 83, we had our daughter, Ashley. And again, things really couldn't be better. We were on our way to the house in the suburbs and the 2.3 kids and the sheepdog. I mean, that's really, what it was kind of all about, right? Yeah. But I could see, even in the back of my mind, a little bit of denial that I think we both had in terms of certain things in our relationship, and I think a lot of couples do, that there were some things, some dynamics that were playing that maybe we weren't being truthful with one another. And fortunately, the good news is that after we had our daughter, one evening, I can remember very clearly, Kelly came to me and said, "Look, I need to talk to you. I've come to the realization I'm pretty sure I'm an alcoholic." I know there was some denial on my part. I just really, well, not really. Because it wasn't like she was a prolific drinker. It wasn't like we went out and got sauced all the time, but she was pretty sure she was. And as we went along and we discussed it, and she was. And she continued to be, of course, the rest of her life, and always was an alcoholic. On top of that, we later learned, not too far after that she was clinically depressed and was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder. So a lot of layers there, yeah, of which the alcohol would cover and really mask the rest of the issues.
Yeah. So you're mid-20s, late 20s,
yes,
or entering late 20s, and this wave now is upon you. And the sheepdog, the whole thing, you had it all figured out, multimillionaire. How did you respond? Was there a part of you that ever wanted to lean out immediately and run? Were you in shock? Were you angry? How did that hit you initially?
There were certainly times in our relationship that, yeah, I wanted to run. Not then. I mean, by then it was a matter of, again, probably a little bit of denial. There was a lot of codependency issues there, and we don't need to get into that part of it, but anybody that's experiencing like that understands what I'm talking about. I mean, you live with somebody, you become a degree codependent with them to a degree. But and there was some denial, but I think I did what a lot of young men do in our society, and that's work. Mm-hmm. I decided my job was to earn a paycheck, earn a living. She'll be okay. We're going to go ahead and get her some help. And we did. She did some outpatient work, and I did it with her. She reached out and did some step work and things of that nature. Nothing that I would call serious, but that's what transpired.
What were you learning about yourself along the way? Because you guys have these parallel journeys where, like you said, your lives are now commingled, and she's in it, and she's working through her side. What were you learning about yourself as you are trying to walk alongside, be dad, still work, caregive in some way? I mean, you told me some stories of coming home, and just it was hard.
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of times that I probably should have done more, been proactive. But I think that a lot of people find themselves just sort of a feeling of helplessness. And there were times when Kelly did not keep her sobriety and got quite inebriated, and I'd come home and find her in significant disarray. I'll share one time that she was at a Publix and tripped and fell. She was inebriated, came home, passed out on the couch. I thought that she had eaten some chocolate or something. Well, it was blood. And of course the immediate reaction is, I got to do something about it. I have to clean her up. I have to do this, which isn't necessarily the right reaction, something like that. But early on, that's what I tried to do. I tried to control the situation, tried to make everything better. Men tend to be fixers anyway. And in that particular situation, what I try to do is fix things.
Yeah. One of the things that was remarkable, as you and I have talked about this story a couple times, is just CR's persistent love. And we can go back and we can judge it. I'm sure you critique it and say, well, I should have this, or I could have this, or was that codependency, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And there's wisdom in looking at the health of our responses and the way that we support each other. But I will say this, that what came through is that you loved her, and you displayed love, and you were persistent in your love. If you could go back and come alongside yourself in that moment and give yourself something, a piece of advice, a gift, maybe to somebody else who finds themselves in that kind of trying to figure out, what do I do? What do you wish that you would have known about caring for yourself and caring for her and for your daughter?
Well, what you just said is key, is caring for yourself. And really in that situation, it has to be caring for yourself, and certainly my daughter. And then obviously caring for Kelly, but in doing it in such a way that I'm not enabling her to continue with the behavior that she is exhibiting at this point in time. And again, this is early in on the relationship. We had a 30-year relationship, and it certainly didn't continue in that vein. But that's early on. And, you know, I'm very fortunate to have a faith component in there. You know, I was able to draw on my faith and thank God that he was blessed me with some guidance and faith. And I was able to hold on in many times with that and with that guiding light that he provided me.
When ultimately it was faith that won that round and won the day. I mean, you described Kelly's experience of battling and battling and wrestling and those forward climbs and uphill climbs. And there was a moment where she felt like there was breakthrough a little bit, and there was a pretty significant victory.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that there were a lot of victories. And you know, looking back now, I've had an opportunity to look back at my life with Kelly, and I've allowed myself to really realize that we had some pretty good times together. You know, it wasn't all gloom and doom. It wasn't all problems and issues. You obviously tend to focus on those things when you have that hurt and that pain, and you start to remember that stuff. But we had a lot of wonderful times together, and she had periods, good solid periods of sobriety. We were very blessed to find the right physicians to help her with the clinical diagnosis that she had. And with that, she was able to get help, and we had some really good, significant times, some family time together, and we're able to grow together. We experienced together 3 inpatient opportunities and 2 outpatient. So that's a lot. But it you know, whatever it takes, you know, in order to find the right path.
You think about a story in the first third of a book. We just breezed through it. I mean, we're just flying through pages. But you look at how present you were and how much you guys grew together and wrestled forward and found that plateau and maybe some breakthrough and felt like, okay, we're out of the woods and we're finding our way forward. And you came to turn number 2. Yeah.
Well, and let me just go back a little bit real quickly and talk a little bit more about her sobriety and because, you know, it ebbs and flows. And along that and during that period of time, I was fortunate enough to talk to people, to therapists, to counselors that were counseling her that I went alongside. Sometimes she decided she didn't want to do that anymore, and I stuck around and got some very useful information. I did have the church there alongside, was involved with my church family, and a great help. But during that period of time, I was able, or I was told what I needed to do was really make a decision. In other words, make a conscious decision. Was I going to stay? And if I was going to stay, how was I going to stay? And the way I needed to stay was to live my life. In other words, don't live in an environment to be there sort of surrounding her existence, but authentically live my life and my daughter's. And I chose to do that. That was a decision I made instead of leaving at a particular period of time, and so I did just that. And it actually was a very healthy thing. It was healthy for Kelly, too, because she goes, hey, what are you doing? You're living your life. You know, you're going to church. You're doing this. You're doing things with my daughter, our daughter. And it helped her to sort of re-engage in a different level.
Yeah. You know. I think that's really wise. Go ahead.
No, and just to your point, and maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, hopefully not, but, you know, we found ourselves kind of going through a series or periods of years where there would be good spots and some not so good spots. You know, during that period of time, Kelly lost her mother. We had what would consider normal tough spots inside a relationship that were separate, obviously, from or certainly from the alcoholism. But we got to a point where, you know, you started to wonder, you know, were we always going to live this way? And Kelly earnestly did try. She really did. She had a desire to find herself, find sobriety in her life. So we moved from where we were living, was West Palm, where our business was, and moved over to this coast. And we found she found a little place that was outside where they had an AA meeting. And she just decided to go. The first time she went, some ladies were there, said, hey, here's our numbers, you know, call us. She didn't call. But something drew her back there, and so she went back. And I remember very distinctly that evening when she came home, and she just looked a little different. She goes, I got to tell you something. I got to be real honest with you. I've never in my heart felt like I could live without drinking. But I heard something this evening, and I know it was God. I didn't hear a voice, but I heard it in my heart, and I know now. I know within the depths of my soul that I don't have to drink to live. And she turned a corner. I'm not going to sit here because reality is usually not what you read in a fairy tale. There were still moments, but she was much better. And the majority of the rest of her life, she had a good sober walk.
Yeah. I loved that part of the story. It felt like there was just kind of a breakthrough. You entered a meadow. You know, there was a little bit of peace, a little bit of reprieve. It seemed like there was some power outside of herself that enabled that.
Absolutely.
And she came to say, God did that and delivered me from that. And I think that was just a beautiful moment in the story. Take us to turn number 2, because you get your feet under you. Now life is moving forward, and you get hit with...
Life is moving forward. She's working a program, and in fact, she actually becomes a sponsor of a number of people, and in our small community, she was looked at as an inspiration because she found sobriety, and she found it the right way, and she worked the program, and she worked hard. I mean, 90 meetings in 90 days, and the whole 9 yards. And then one day, she said, something's not right, and she had a lump in her breast. So she did what all women do. She got a mammogram, and the next day we got a call that she needed to come in again, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was fortunate, the type of breast cancer, if you can say that any kind of breast cancer is fortunate, it was an in situ carcinoma, which means that it was in the milk ducts. So she didn't have to have radiology or chemo, but it was best if she had a mastectomy. Yeah. And I honestly thought she was just going to kind of fall apart. You know, you look back at some of the things that happened. I thought, well, this is it. It was amazing, and yeah. It was God. She was strong. She was calm. We talked about it, and she had the mastectomy. A couple months later, she started having a few lumps in her other breast. They were benign, but they wanted to do lumpectomy after lumpectomy. And she says, you know what? I'm not going to mess with this. Let's just do both of them. Let's just get it over with. She did, and we went, hey, there's our cancer scare. We're good, right? It's over. She was deemed cancer-free. We high-fived, and we were getting ready to go on with life. You know, we had a whole lot of living to do. And so away we went.
Yeah. How did you deal with that first diagnosis? Did that hit, was it upside down the apple cart? Are you the kind of person who you just absorb it and tuck it away? Did it hurt? Was there fear or pain? What was that like when you guys walked through that?
I was sitting with her. We had a home just south of here in Venice, and we had a garden home. For those of you not in Florida listening now, it's basically where the pool's inside the house. So in other words, you walk in the front door, there's a pool, and so we had a kind of a private courtyard, and we would sit in there, and she got the call with the diagnosis, and I was sitting right there, and I could tell by what she was saying to the doctor that she had cancer, and I was very calm about it and listened, and we talked for a few minutes, and I got up and went into the bedroom and bawled my eyes out.
Yeah. You move on. You go through all of that. She stays buoyed through that. I mean, just remarkable.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I mean, I know in the second mastectomy, she was experienced now, and she had it one morning that afternoon. They let her out of the hospital, and she insisted on going to a meeting with her with these girlfriends, and she paid for that. And that was a little bit bold, but just that was her spirit and her character. You know? Yeah.
Well, it's any of us who have been through this or have walked through the journey of cancer with loved ones or us ourselves, you have these moments where you get this conversation and then it seems like it goes this way. And your story was you guys made progress, felt like you were in the clear, and then how long was it before turn number 3?
Almost exactly a year. So we were on our way to greater, right? When we think we've got it all figured out again. she knew something was wrong, and she decided she needed to go to her gynecologist because she had that innate sense that she needed to be checked out. Her gynecologist told her that she did have a tumor, but they felt pretty confident it was benign. It didn't have any characteristics of being cancer, and quite frankly, the thought was, well, you've experienced breast cancer, you were cancer-free. It isn't the type of cancer that would all of a sudden show up somewhere else in the body.
Immediately, you
had surgery. So
make a plan and get after it.
We had she had surgery. She had her gynecologist was a surgeon, and explained everything. Going to go in surgery, and they said, well, just in case that we have this gynecological oncologist, what they call gynoc, was going to be in the operating room, just to be there. And I'm sure they said a little bit more, but in my mind, that's what I heard. Hey, it's just kind of there. And I was going to be about a 3 to 4 hour surgery. It was a hysterectomy, and at least. And about 30 minutes in, I get called to one of those little side rooms. You have a waiting room where everybody waits in the side room. And I walk in, and there's the gynoc and the gynecologist, and they just looked at me and went, "I'm sorry." I didn't know how to react to that. "I'm sorry. What are you sorry about?" I knew, but I didn't want to know. And the gynecologist said, "Look, we got in there, and it's serious. She does have ovarian cancer, and she's stage 3C. For those of you that are not familiar with the stages, stage 4 is mostly considered kind of the last road. So she was right on the edge of being terminal. But we held on to that 3C. That's what we had to hold on to. But it was crushing. I mean, we went through all of this. She's in surgery. I went outside and knew I had to figure out a way to tell her family and her friends, so I decided the best person to call was my sister, because I didn't know who else to call, and practice on her. And I told her, we're just going to get this right. We're going to get this speech right. So that's what I did. I went outside and we practiced, and then I made the calls. She, of course, had her surgery, and when she finally came out of surgery and woke up, I looked at her, and I knew I was going to be the one to tell her. And she woke up and looked up at me, and I just smiled and said, "We got a little bit more work to do." And she smiled, and she just nodded and said, "I know."
Yeah.
And that was it. We almost innately knew that we had another challenge in our lives.
You're kind of a Richard Rohr, Thomas Merton, kind of transcendent, monkish kind of guy. Have you always been steady? Like, what happened to you in your life of faith, in your life as an optimist, as a hopeful person? Was that challenged in that moment? What did that look like? Yeah.
Yes, it absolutely, and I'll relate one story to you that I think would explain that how I was challenged in that. About 2 weeks before she passed away, I guess I came to the realization that we only had a week or two. And, well, I should set it up. I was very blessed and fortunate to be her caretaker. She wanted to die at home, so she stayed at the house. I'm sorry, am I jumping ahead too far?
No, that's okay. I was going to ask, did you choose that role?
Yes, and I think that's very important, especially for those that are listening, that I chose it, but I want to say that I was blessed to be able to do that. But that's my journey. I don't know how I could do that, and I think it's really important for people that are experiencing that or have experienced to not feel the guilt that they can't do that. God gives us gifts, and, he might give you the gift, instead of being a caretaker, being the person that can really find the right people to take care of somebody, and then you be alongside that person in a different capacity. It just so happened that's my journey. Everybody's journey is so different, and the one thing that I think is very important for people to not look at what I'm saying and go, "Oh, I couldn't do that," or "I wouldn't do that. I don't know if I could do that." Things just happen, and then you find your way, and you let God walk beside you, and help you navigate what's best for you. So we got to a point where she was home, and I knew there were about 2 weeks left, and I happened to have a pretty significant investment at the time. I had a call from my partner that said, it's over. I can't do this anymore. I could not be involved with it because I was taking care of her. She had gotten extremely ill about 6 months before, so I wasn't able to be involved. So this business venture was failing. In fact, he called me that night to tell me it's failing. This was in 2011, so all the catastrophe of 2008 and everything. Along with that, I had some real estate that I was slowly coming to realization I was not a real estate magnate, and I had been starting to formulate the fact that I had some properties that I wasn't going to be able to hold on to, was going to need to sell, and was going to get hurt significantly by selling them. So that actually happened about the same time he called. So I had that, and then I realized my wife was going to die. And, instead of running from that, I just sat there and I went, okay. I don't know if there's anything else that could happen to me right now that is really going to bother me. I got to the point where I was kind of forced into acceptance. But interestingly enough, there was a level of peace, kind of a countenance that came over me, and it was like, so what?
Were there any practices that you were conscious of that you fought for? Like, I will walk, I will,
yes.
Like self-care things that you did that worked for you, that you said, I did it, and I'm looking back, I'm so glad that whatever.
Well, interestingly enough, as we've talked about being kind of several parts of my life. In that early part, I mentioned about consciously living for myself. And I mean, with my wife and my daughter, but making sure that I did what I needed to do. So I did a lot of things in that phase that were good for me. I take things literally, so I thought, well, I need a mountaintop experience, so I started climbing. Because I'm not very original, right? So I have to be literal like that. I found it was important for me to separate myself sometimes, just have some solitude and silence. And my wife was very encouraging about that. Kelly did a good job of saying, yeah, go do that. And so, yes, I had experience of going out and retreats and silent retreats and things of that nature. And more on a day-to-day basis, contemplative prayer, it has been and is very important to me, being able to get some silence in my life and try to empty myself as much as possible so I can fill myself up with Christ.
When you told me the story of sitting out on the porch or the back patio, whatever you guys called that, but you had those times where you were present with a deep hurt and conscious of it, watching this process. And you guys at the time, when those conversations were happening, you knew that the process of saying goodbye was happening. How were you able to be present? Did you choose to be present in those moments? And if so, what gave you the capacity to be able to lean in, to hold on to those? Because now looking back, it sounds like those are treasures.
They were, and I don't know if you really realized it at the time. And for anybody that's going through this pain and suffering now, or maybe it's been pretty recent, when you're going through it, it stinks. There's nothing good about it. You don't appreciate it. You don't value it. Now that I've got a little distance, sure, I look back and I realize how valuable time was. We had an extended period of time. We had about 5 months where she was extremely ill. We came to the realization. She went through chemo like a champ. She had, she fought it hard. She was actually considered cancer-free one more time for about 6 months, and then it came back with a vengeance. And she was actually put in a hospice from our house, in a hospice, but she fought to get out, and they said she's one of the very few people to ever do that. And I'm sorry, I know I'm kind of going another direction here, but I'll never forget when I was sitting waiting for her, to put her in a wheelchair for me to take her back home to die, but we'd set up with hospice and everything, and one of the volunteers was a sweet lady, and she didn't mean any harm by it, but she looked at me, she goes, it's really great that you're taking care of your mother this way. And it kind of hits, right? It hits that how things have advanced.
Yeah.
And we got her in the car, and I shook that off as best I could, and we took her home. So we'd sit out there to where you were asking about, what you were asking about. And sometimes we just watch each other. But I would take the iPad out there and we'd play music. And we'd listen to music. I don't mean we'd listen to music. We'd listen to music. Things slowed down. She existed on Coca-Cola and mashed potatoes for about 3 months. I'm pretty convinced it was about that long. And so she'd have her Coke and her mashed potatoes and maybe green beans every once in a while. But obviously when you're going through that type of medication, and even after she went into palliative care, really doesn't want to eat, but she ate enough, and we just listened and we talked. We were able to mourn together. Yeah. That was an interesting thing, and I think that's very hard for people to understand unless they've experienced that. And looking back, I don't know how people handle it when they have sudden death, a car crash or something like that. That's really tough because they're gone. I did have the privilege of mourning with her, talking. We talked about what she wanted for a funeral. We just talked about those types of things that you sure don't want to have those conversations, but we did. And we were able to have meaningful conversations.
C.S. Lewis wrote a book. If you haven't read the book, A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, if you haven't, he was losing his wife, and C.S. Lewis just wrote his journey, and it's beautiful. So if you haven't read A Grief Observed, it's worth it. And in it, he really dispels the idea that you get through something, or like all of those ideas about what it means to heal. And so I want to get to his description and see what you think of that. But before we make that turn, if you're willing to just give language to October 19th. And when you told me the story of sitting in your house and the transition that happened kind of for you. So
we we had Kelly set up in the living room, moved all the couches away, and that's where her hospital bed was and everything. And again, I was fortunate to be able to take care of her around the clock, about every 3 hours, get up and take care of her. She had one friend that she felt comfortable being around, having come in, and she'd come in, and that gave me an opportunity to maybe go to the grocery store, things like that nature. But I was there the rest of the time, and we knew it was close, but the night before she passed away, I knew something was going on, and something happened internally, and you knew. And by now, she's probably 55, maybe 60 pounds, maybe, but she'd been in a semi-comatose state because of medication now for some time, but she was able, just before she went fully under, to open her eyes real quickly, and she got out an "I love you," and then she slipped into another level of consciousness, and it's profoundly sad, it's painful, and it was weirdly peaceful at the same time. I think because I knew she was suffering, and I knew that it was near. So I sat with her, didn't go to bed that night, we sat with her, and the next morning called hospice and just told them I'd give an update as things transgressed and transpired. And so her best friend came over. I called her and said, I think we're near. And there's they talk about thin places in a room or in a space, and there were definitely thin places. I could sense that I wasn't alone in the room, and I don't mean her best friend. I mean there were. It wasn't just Kelly in the room. There was certainly a presence, a good presence, a light presence, and it was comforting. We sat there, and I finally went to her and I said, your friend's here. She's going to take care of me, and I'll be fine. And it wasn't another minute. She took a big breath, and she was gone. And that was, October 19th at 4:10 p.m.
Yeah. You said you just kind of sat there, and the dog was there.
Right. After it happens, you work yourself to a position of you're the caretaker, you're the one. Now, that person that you cared so much for is gone, and you have that first release. And they warned me at hospice that dogs mourn. Well, her dog, which the one thing that I inherited from Kelly was this Chihuahua that my beautiful wife, not my now beautiful wife, and I got to live with for a number of years, was this little Chihuahua called Pepita. and Pepita recently departed from us. But they warned me that dogs mourn. And if you know anything about little dog Chihuahuas, they attach to people. This dog was very attached to Kelly, and the dog did. The dog started crying. And so I had to comfort the dog. And we, they came, and hospice came, and we dressed the body, and and I was able to go in the bedroom, and Pepita and I cried the rest of the night, released.
Thank you for being willing to put words to that experience, and that's a pretty vulnerable thing to do, and do it with people, but thank you, because it helps us understand more, and so I'm grateful for that. C.S. Lewis, as he writes about trying to get his mind around healing, because that hurt, that level of hurt, that level of difference is a strange thing. And he says, this idea that you get over something is false. And he said, you get over sickness, where you get over a fever. And C.S. Lewis writes, and he says, death and loss is more like amputation, that it's possible to heal from it, but you are not the same. And would you say that he's, you hear Lewis say that, and it's okay to critique him if you disagree, but when you hear that, how does that hit you?
I think he's really spot on. And the way I've described it to people, it's kind of like in life you have a backpack. And your experiences in life, you kind of put in that backpack, and you always carry with you the great experiences and the tough ones. So, when people would come up to me and say, time heals all wounds, or, and they're trying to be supportive, and so you accept it, and you're gracious, and you smile, and you hug them, but you're thinking to yourself, no, it doesn't. And those that have experienced loss like that or pain, they know, no, it never goes away. But what you do is you learn that backpack of life, you learn to put it in that backpack. Every once in a while, it's going to kind of be jostled out, and it's going to be there in front of you, and it's going to surprise you, and you go, wow, what's happened? Why am I seeing that? Why is that hurt there again? Obviously, early on, it happened more than it does now. And every once in a while, I'll kind of reach back there and pick it out and kind of go, okay, what was that? Let me remember a little bit of that. And I know that sounds strange. Why would you ever want to remember that hurt? But it's part of your life. Now, please understand, I'm always going back there and lifting out the wonderful experiences of life, the things that are happening in my life now that just recently happened, my grandkids, all those types of things. But it's important, I think, to be able to have the ability to sort of look at that and know it's always back there in my backpack of life. Sometimes it feels really heavy. Other times it's a little bit lighter. But the problem is, I think, in moving forward and healing, is when you're constantly going back there and you're always just kind of out of habit looking at it, daily or sometimes hourly, that you live with it. You do.
What have you learned about the healing process for you? Again, it's different for all of us. It's not, our stories aren't going to be the same, but for you, as you have made steps in this process and healing and the next chapters that you're writing, what are some things that you would say for you have found to be helpful?
Well, I think something very simplistic, but I read something that Henry Nouwen wrote, and it's, he's an amazing individual, theologian, and writes some very profound things. So, of course, I pick out the simplest thing that I think he ever wrote. And he says, there are people, when they're in line at the grocery store, they're happy to go, hey, come get in line in front of me. I was always one of those kind of people. I love to have people, you only got 2 or 3 items, go in front of me. But when I was in line and somebody offered to me, hey, Go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm good. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Don't need to button line. I'm good. And really what he's saying there is that, sometimes you have to have acceptance. You need to accept that help. Obviously from God and from the people around you. So what I was able to do was sort of understand that I needed to accept the level of support that I really wasn't necessarily able to even accept when Kelly was dying. Yeah. A lot of it was after. And that was a real big component of my healing, be able to have acceptance, be able to allow people to come into my life, and have people to love and be with. Yeah. Because, life is amazing. It is terribly painful and just amazingly wonderful, sometimes all at the same time. So, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing.
That ability to see, we talk about it in terms of commingled, and the idea that really it is good and broken and future all at the same time. And trying to honor each of those realities, that is the truth at any moment. That takes practice and a level of consciousness. If you could help us, we got to wrap up or they're going to knock me off my stool, but Jerome has a way, he has his Jedi powers. But in the last couple minutes, just, not towards sympathy, but more towards an empathic way. For us to develop that, and as a culture, as friends, as neighbors, as people, you have been a leader in your church, leader in the business community, leader in your family. You've walked some of these tough places. What are some of the things that you would say to me, to us, that you say, you know what, young sir, study up on this because it's important for you to be ready to love well. What can I do so that I can love well for people who are in the broken parts of those stories?
I think empathy and space. I am simply by my nature of being a man wanting to be a fixer. My wife certainly appreciates that because, I want to be her protector, and whenever she has a problem, like I want to fix it. And I think that somebody that's had an experience like I have, early on I wanted to just be the person that could tell you, hey, this is what's going to happen and that's going to happen. And, and maybe from a pedestrian standpoint, I could give you some of the steps. But everybody's journey is so different. So, my job and how I can really provide for somebody is to have empathy and to listen and to just walk alongside somebody. The hardest thing for me to do when somebody is asking me about a hurt, a tragedy, or maybe a concern they have, is to not try to provide the answer, but let God do that. Now, if I am blessed and fortunate enough that God uses me as an instrument to help in that, that's wonderful. That is wonderful. But it's not my job.
Yeah. When you look forward to writing in this next season, what have you noticed? What are you learning that for yourself? So I think up ahead, God is stretching me in this way or in that way. Is there a place where you can tell that you are being worked on right now in this place?
Sure. And I think like everybody, it's called life. My wife and I are, still experience challenges, she's experiencing what a lot of us do with her folks getting older, and we recently lost her mom and with her dad, and so we're walking that together, and but we have a wonderful time together. She is my soulmate, and we are growing together, and we have fun along with some heartache and hurt, but that's just life. I think the thing that I'm really feel very fortunate that I've been able to go through the experiences that I have and still feel because there's certainly times in my journey where I've done everything I could not to feel. And I feel sorry for people that have gotten to that point in their lives. And it's very easy to do, and I don't fault anybody for that, because sometimes that's the easiest way out.
Yeah. I love the opportunity to sit and share some time. Thank you for giving words to some things that are hard to put words to. There is a turn 4, these unexpected turns, and
There
you
is.
guys are into that story now. There's another chapter to be, so maybe we'll have to do, next episode and talk about what comes next and how do we do that together.
There's a happy, great 4th chapter in this story. So
Yeah,
absolutely.
well, we'll write it. CR, thank you for who you are, for just the way that you can talk openly and help us get our hearts and heads and hands around some of this tough stuff. It's been helpful for me. I've had multiple of these conversations, but tonight especially. So we thank you for that. Would you guys say thank you to CR?
Thanks.